Hi again. Which way should you hold the camera when taking portraits? Landscape or portrait orientation? Well, of course, there's no absolute right and wrong way of doing it. But in this video, I'd like to share my thoughts with you about this. And straight away, I'll admit that for a long time now, I've had something of a bee in my bonnet about this topic. Ever since I noticed years ago that I wasn't taking hardly any portraits in the portrait orientation. So I'm going to be quite opinionated here, and I want to tell you why I think you should nearly always take portraits in the landscape orientation. Now, when you look at the photos I've taken in this course, and on my other courses if you've watched them, you'll notice that I rarely take photos in portrait orientation. There are a few, but not many. Generally speaking, I just think that landscape orientation portraits look better. Now, I'll go through the reasons one by one. But remember, this is just my opinion. Other photographers may not agree with me. Who cares? What do they know? Anyway, you can make your own mind up after listening to my reasoning. First of all, consider how we view the photos. Fewer and fewer people are printing out their photos these days. And although we're now in the age of the smartphone, most of you watching this will be using DSLR or mirrorless cameras, and chances are you'll be viewing the photos on a tablet or monitor or even a TV. These devices are rectangular, so it stands to reason that images will look better when they fill the screen better. Here's a combination of similar images in both orientations. If you're watching this on your phone, by the way, turn the phone around and watch in landscape orientation. I'm sure you'll agree that the landscape orientation photos have far more impact. Well, it's obvious really, isn't it? They're far more suited to the rectangular shape of the screen. So anyway, that's the first reason. It can happen sometimes, even to me, that I look at a landscape orientation photo afterwards on the computer and think, maybe that would have looked better in portrait orientation. Now, at that point, I would never think to myself, only if only I'd taken it the other way round. No, that thought just doesn't enter my head, because all I have to do is crop the photo in post-processing. Sure, the act of cropping would lose me a little bit of resolution, but today's cameras have plenty of megapixels, so it's really a non-problem. Well, not unless I wanted to make a huge poster-size print, and that's very rare. It's very, very easy to crop a landscape orientation image to make it portrait orientation, and that gives you an element of safety. But try doing it the other way around, changing an image from portrait orientation to landscape orientation. It can't be done. Well, not unless you want to spend hours reconstructing half the photo using Photoshop. Once you've taken a shot in portrait orientation, you're stuck with it. There's no going back. So that's the reason number 2. Quite often the photos that linger in your memory and also in the memories of your family are the ones that have a storytelling element to them. And that might be a place or location where you visited, or maybe something else going on, or there's other people in the scene. The problem with many portrait orientation photos is that there's just not enough room for the storytelling, and so the images lack context. You end up with just a portrait that fills the frame. Okay, it may be a very lovely portrait with beautiful lighting, but it won't often promote much emotion in the viewer other than just being impressed with the quality of the shot. In many cases that's fine, I've done that a lot in this course myself. But landscape orientation gives you more scope for incorporating more information in a photo and showing the context in which the portrait was taken. Whereas in a portrait orientation photo, you mostly just end up with more of the subject's body in the photo, so it doesn't really buy you anything. You could have done that by just taking a couple of steps back. In the previous video, I talked about using negative space and how it can add drama to images and focus the viewer's attention on the subject. Now, you may have noticed in that video that all but one of the example photos were taken in a landscape orientation. It just stands to reason that it's far more difficult to incorporate negative space when using the portrait orientation. Outdoor portraits will often include too much sky or too much of the ground. Obviously that very much depends on the circumstances of the shot, but generally speaking, I would say that negative space works much better and is much easier to achieve when shooting landscape orientation. Negative space is just one type of composition, But of course, there's other little compositional tricks that can also improve your photos. And to my mind, they're all much more effective and easier to incorporate when using landscape orientation. For example, repeating patterns in the background can look great. Could be trees, windows, arches, etc. Diagonal lines in the foreground leading into your subject. Also focusing on your subject with a wide aperture to blur the background, something you will have noticed I do a lot. That's also more effective in landscape orientation, simply because there's likely to be more of the background, in the shot. So that's about it. Those are the reasons I rarely shoot in portrait orientation. Amongst professional photographers, the conversation sometimes turns towards developing a style. Now, a style is something that usually evolves over a period of time, and a certain style can give the photographer a slight edge, especially when it comes to picking up customers. Landscape orientation, in my opinion, makes it easier to develop that style. But remember, these are only my opinions, but anybody disagreeing with them is, of course, totally wrong. Bye for now.